What's up, everybody? Today we've got a fun one, actually. Got a, get a better view of this thing here. Got a 98 TJ in here. It's got fresh coils, fresh lift, everything like that. And the owner is not at a point where they want to put in a slip yoke kit yet. So as you can see, the rear drive shaft is not in here, and that's because it was at a very unhappy angle. Lots of vibration, lots of noise, didn't want to ruin those U-joints. So we pulled that out before bringing it over here. So what we are going to install today, let's see if that is around here somewhere. Not quite sure where I put that, but we've got a, oh, here it is. Just a simple drop spacer kit for the transfer case. These are 1 1/4, I think. This is not the ideal way to fix this problem by any means. This is also not a permanent fix. Definitely want to keep your belly pan up as tight as you can. Slip yoke eliminator is the way to go. Less vibration, better on the U-joints. That will happen down the road for this Jeep. Just not right now. So we're going to throw that in, and while we're throwing that in, we're going to get rid of the factory spaghetti linkage for the transfer case in these things. It is, I guess it works, but hardly. Not a good setup. I don't like it. I don't know anybody that actually likes it. So we're going to put in this. This is the Savvy cable shift. This is probably the 5th one I've done now. I did my own, did my dad's, done a couple friends now, about to do this one. Fantastic kit. The original one was the Novak, I believe. And Mr. Blaine, if you're on the forums, you probably know who that is. He worked with Savvy and worked out all of the design flaws for that kit, and they came up with this kit. So this is kind of the new and improved version of that kit. I've never had any issues with mine, and my transfer case is about 1/2 inch from my tub with a full flat skid. So it's a really good upgrade. Definitely recommend that one. I'll throw a link to it in the description for this video. Only like 170 bucks, 100% worth it. So we're gonna pull the skid down, do that cable shift while we're in there, because it's way easier to get to with no skid on there. I do not recommend trying to do it with the skid on there. You will hate yourself. So we're going to pull that skid down and get that cable shift in, and then when the skid goes back up, we'll throw those spacers on there. So first thing you're going to do is get some blocks or a jack stand. I'm not a huge fan of jack stands. I've had them fail on me. Sent me to the hospital. So I'm using blocks, and I just need to support the drivetrain where it would normally be supported by the transmission or the transfer case mount there. So I'm just going to put a block, or you can use a jack stand underneath the bell housing here. That's a nice stable point. Totally acceptable to support this stuff. It's also not going to be forever. It's only going to be for an hour or two. And then once that's there, we're going to slowly lower the 6 bolts on here until this pan drops. These are 3/4 inch bolts. Sometimes they're a little corroded. You can use a 19 millimeter if that's the case. They do occasionally break free in the frame. I have a video showing when I did my flat belly skid that kind of addressed that issue a little bit more. So if you're running into that issue, go ahead and look back at that video. I talk about it a little bit there. But we're going to drop this pan, get all that stuff out of the way, and then we'll show you where we're at.
All right.
Yes. So one side note for this before I get too crazy here. Before you drop this down, or even as you're dropping it down, at the front part of the skid here, there's 4 cutouts here. And those, you can kind of see them, there's new nuts on them here. Those are the nuts that hold that mount to this skid. So those are 1/2 inch, and you'll need a deep well socket usually to pull those off. You'll need to pull all 4 of those off once the nuts are off, and then you can go ahead and drop this whole skid down. All right, so we got the skid plate off. We can kind of take a look as to what we got under here. We have a Kurt over there. So we've got the factory bracketry here, which this piece here is what bolts to the tub, and you can see the bolts on the inside. This bracket here bolts to the side of the transfer case. You've got one bolt right here, and then there's another one tucked way up in the top over here, or on the back. It's really hard to get to, and it's usually extremely tight. Those two are both 9/16. You've got the shifter tab right here. That bolt right here is also a 9/16. The ones for this are on the inside, which we're going to pull those off first. Those are 10 millimeter. So what we're going to do is pull this off from the inside, and then we're going to undo as much of this bracketry as we can and get it out of the way. I think we can get pretty much all of it out of the way, actually, so we just have this bracket on the transfer case to work with yet, because that is a pain. So if you look on the inside here, if you have factory carpeting or bed liner or any bed rug or anything like that, these will be under that most likely. These 4 bolts here on the side of your trans tunnel, those are 10 millimeter, and those are what hold that bracket to the underside of the tub. So we're going to pop those off first, and then pull as much of that linkage out as we can so we can get to that other bracket that's on the transfer case. So I've got the bracketry off of here, and the way that worked, you can see it here. This piece, slide this back up in here so you can see what was going on. This piece was, Kurt, do you want to hold this for a second? Just kind of hold that right there. This piece, there you go. Okay, so that shaft goes through this center hole here. So when I pulled those 4 bolts out from up above, I was able to just kind of pull this straight down and get it out of the way. And then up here is where the linkage actually goes. You can hear me moving the shifter lever up inside the cab. That just has a bushing, and that is this little adjustment screw here. And then on the back of that, there's you can see there's a little piece right here, and that normally had a bushing on it, but I was able to just wedge a screwdriver in between this square and the plate up there, and then kind of just pry it off, and that popped right out. The bushing is actually still in there, I can see it. And then down here for the lower one, I used a 9/16 as I said before, and back the bolt off of this plate here. This is what actually adjusts what gear you're in the transfer case. Light here, there we go. So when you're loosening that, it'll move at first until you hit all the way one way or the other way. I think all the way forward is 2-wheel drive, so you'll probably end up in 2-wheel drive when you're backing that off. Make sure you save all of the hardware, because most of this hardware does get reused if I remember correctly. But now that, oh, and then this last one up here, once I had the other 2 pieces undone, I just had the shaft that was through this bracket here, and I was able to just kind of wiggle that around and pry on it a little bit and slide it out of there. That's just another kind of pressure fit bushing you can see right here. So now that all that is out of the way, I can get to that last top bolt. I got the lower one here off. That came off pretty easily. That top one is very, very tight and very, very hard to get to. I have the transmission and transfer case dropped as low as I can while I'm still supporting it. I don't want to let it down too low, because then there's no support for it, and all that weight is on the engine mounts, and I don't want to do that. So it's as low as I can get. I can get a wrench up in here now. It is going to take a lot of pressure. It's kind of hard. There's very little chance to get an impact in there, but you might be able to slide a stubby impact or something up in the top if you can get some swivel adapters or something of the sort. But that's kind of the last bolt, and then this bracket pops off, and then we start to reassemble everything. So I'm going to get a wrench in there and pop that one off. Okay, so I was able to get a 9/16 ratcheting box end up on there, and just took a rag, shoved it on the end to kind of protect my hand a little bit. And I have just enough room, you can see just enough room in there, and I was able to get enough pressure on it to break that one loose. Sometimes these bolts here are not actual bolts, they are studs, so sometimes you will end up taking the stud out rather than taking the nut off of it, which we are going to see what we did here in just a second. Nope, it does appear that I am taking the nut off, which is fantastic. That makes it a lot easier. So let me get that off all the way. Alright, save that. And there we go. And that is the last piece of that bracket. You can see we've got that right there is that upper bolt. That's so much of a pain, but everything is out now. This bracket gets retained. The one on the lower side of the linkage here that goes to the transfer case, I can't remember, let's see, they do send a new one. It's in here, so that does get pulled off and not replaced. Here is all of the hardware. These 4 bolts here are for holding the bracketry to the tub. Actually, yep, these, this. So that is all for holding the bracketry to the tub. This is for one side of the cable at the transfer case down here. That'll go to there with this pin and that cotter pin. And then this piece, and this piece go with this part here, which goes on the tub side of the cable up at the shifter. And that kind of just gets reassembled over that other factory tab like this. So I'm going to kind of just put all of this together roughly on the cable, get it kind of sort of in place, and then I'll show you where we're at. All right, so these are the bolts supplied, and the washers are on the back side on the tub. Those are 1/2-inch drive, and then these are the flange nuts for the bottom side. These are also 1/2-inch. So I'm going to see if I can set the camera down here in a way that you can still see what's going on. Kind of. There we go. So the cable is kind of just going to sit just like this. I've got the bracket off of it here that goes forward, and the cable part will go on the top. It is bent. This one is bent down and this one is bent out, so it can really only fit on the tub one way. So that will go right up there like that, and then this lower bracket will sit like this with the cable underneath hitting those two bolts on the transfer case, and then the cable will slide right back into where it was. So this is just going to go in like this. This is where it helps to have 2 people. If you have somebody on the top side of the tub that can run those bolts for you while you hold a wrench down here. It is possible to do it by yourself if you have really long arms, but it sucks. So 2 people is really handy here. All right, so this is bolted on up here, and then I also have the tab bolted on down here, which I'll show you that orientation in a second, and then the bracket on the transfer case is bolted on. Now, if you have an automatic, like this one is, it gets a little crowded in here where the shifter cable for the transmission comes through and the bracketry to hold that. So what I did is, kind of hard to see here, but I actually ran it inside of that cable loop. So this cable comes through, and then you can see over here it runs to the inside of the transmission cable loop behind this bracket right here. And you can see right here, it's the inside. Nothing is touching. Everything's got clearance to run, so that should be just fine there. As for this tab down here, which is the actual gear selector for the transfer case, I was wrong before. All the way down is 4 low. When I was taking it off, I just pushed it into 4 high because I couldn't jump through neutral without the transmission being in neutral. So I do now have this all the way in 4 low. I put the tab on there and pushed it down all the way. This is the location it should be at in 4 low, which is just barely, I can't even fit my finger in between here, just almost touching the case itself. It is slotted, so it kind of has to go in a certain way. You'll be able to do it one way or the other, but it will only line up this way, one direction. And the cable will also attach up here. So that tab right there, I pulled the shifter in the cab into 4 low also. So both that tab and this tab are set to 4 low. And then I can just connect my cable to here, connect the cable to there, make any little adjustments I need to on the cable itself to make sure that that is a nice setup. I don't want a bunch of stress on that cable. I don't want it too short. I kind of just want it where it's happy. I'll put those 2 pieces in, and then I'll run everything through the gears to make sure that everything shifts appropriately as it should. And that's about it for that. So I'm going to throw those on, and then I'll show you what it's like. The way I did this was I connected this one first. You can see there's a little adapter piece in there to kind of fill where that bushing was, and then a washer and a nut for the back side. I believe that that was a 10mm and a 1/2 inch for those is what I used. That seemed to work all right. And then this is just a pin that slides through here with a cotter pin that'll go through here when I'm done. You'll want to make sure this little nut here is tightened, and the same for the one up there. And then you'll also want to check these here and the other 2 at the other bracket up there. So right now it's in 4 low all the way down. Kurt, do you want to shift it all the way to 2 high? Okay, so that's at 2 high there. You can see that this came up quite a bit, and that went back. Do you want to go to 4 high? Yep, 1 adjustment there, and then neutral, and then back to neutral, and then 4 low again. Okay, and there's 4 low, back to where we started. So it runs through everything perfectly, and now all we got to do is tighten all our bolts one last time, and then we can throw the skid plate back up. Okay, everything is all wrapped up in there with the cable. I've got the cotter key in there. Everything is adjusted. Everything is tight. We ran through the gears a couple more times just to make sure that everything is moving as it should. I did have to make a little bit of adjustment on this one. I had to adjust it out a little bit. It wasn't quite latching into 4 low, but that is adjusted. That is good now. So next thing is to put the skid back on. Garbage factory spaghetti linkages. So we've got this kit. I do not remember who this kit was from. It was really cheap, 35 bucks maybe. I will throw a link to that in the description as well. It came with these spacers, which I believe are poly. These sleeves for the spacers, which just slide right on in. And then new bolts, obviously. I do not like these bolts because they use an Allen key, which is not really ideal for this. But again, this is temporary. This is a band-aid. This is not a permanent solution. So that uses a 5/16 Allen key. So we're gonna throw that skid onto a block on top of the floor jack there, and then just kind of slowly raise everything up, get the bolts lined back up for the transmission mount there, and then slowly work it up until we're threading everything back in, and then we should be good to go. So I've got my 3 in over here. They are not tight. We are just kind of loosely fitting everything before we tighten everything down. As you're bringing this skid plate up, you got to make sure that the bolts coming out of the bottom of that mount slide into the little plate in there so you can access them here. So while Kurt is over there getting his 3 in, I'm going to take the time to get these transmission bolts back in, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then once those are in and tight, then we'll lift the skid plate all the way back up and get those 6 bolts tightened all the way down, and then we should be completely done. All right, these are in, and I will say they are, I'm gonna repeat my resentment for these bolts. Not only did the Allen key suck, we got lucky, however, and realized that a T50 fits in there perfectly. This one's not even tight. A T50 fits in there perfectly, and that helped a lot. I could put an impact run in, then tighten everything down with an actual ratchet rather than using an Allen key the whole time. However, because these are tapered and a very small head actually, I was very afraid that they were going to pull through there, and they actually did on this one center one here. So I was lucky enough to have washers that fit on each one. So I've got washers on every single one of them, and obviously now I'll go through and retighten them. Now that one was loose, but they, you can see we've got a little bit of a gap in there now, so that is much better. The drive shaft angle is much better than it was before. That's actually probably drivable now, whereas before it was not. You were probably going to throw that U-joint very quickly. So I'm gonna go through, check these one more time on that, and then probably wake Kurt up over there and take this thing for a test drive, make sure everything is good to go, and then we're done. Well, we got it all back together. Also threw an adjustable front track bar on there so we could get the front end back aligned, and tighten down the front shocks. Those weren't actually connected, so there's a little bit of work to do on this yet, but we're going to take it back to the owner and they can wrap up the last couple things, and then this should be roadworthy again. Guess we'll find out if it drives any better shortly. All right, so we took that one back to the owner, and Kurt drove that one there because he drove it for us to work on it, so he could kind of give a comparison. And he said that the vibration was mostly gone. There was a little bit of vibration there yet, but for the most part it was gone, way improved. Less rattles, less bumps, stuff like that. So again, not a permanent fix using the spacers like that, but it's gonna help get through taking to an SYE and a CV drive shaft, because those are, you end up sticking some money into them, $600-700 to do it right. So that'll get you through for the time being. But I mean, regardless, if you really pull that transfer case skid down for any point whatsoever, it pays to do the savvy cable. I mean, the stock linkage just bind up over time, just by nature, especially if you live north of the Rust Belt. So it's never a bad idea to do that. It's a small investment for a very large upgrade, even if your cable works as it is. So highly recommend that. Again, I'll throw the link for that in the bio. But definitely a good thing to do. Makes butter smooth. Actually, it's, can't tell, but I mean, this is an 05, and this has only got 104,000 miles on it, and that's, we did it on this Jeep as well when we built it, just because we were in there and it would just be foolish not to put it in. That stock linkage is not great. So anyway, so that is how you get that savvy cable in there. Pretty simple process, just a little annoying, but definitely recommend. So appreciate you guys watching, sticking around for the whole thing. And if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments. I will get to them as quickly as I can. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you on the next one.